Alright guys, just a little bit more Ace Combat. I thought I'd show off the late attack cruise missiles I had mentioned in the last video. I actually want to talk a little bit about lore. And something I don't... I should say, it's particularly a reason I really don't like the character Avril in 7. She's obviously, got attitude issues and father issues and all this other stuff, and she's mad at Harling for some reason, who ended the war that her father got killed in, even though it was the Yuktobanians and the Belkans. Well, I mean, really, ultimately, the Belkans who caused it. But she's mad at Harling, despite the fact that he was literally kidnapped so that the war would continue. Whatever. She's obviously not a student of history. That's fine. But one of the reasons I don't like her is because you're supposed to, I guess, empathize with her. And they're listening to enemy propaganda. They're listening to Princess Cosette, or whatever her name is. And she's awful. And she's talking about how, Osea needs to be destroyed, and how terrible everything is, and how terrible the Oseans are. And they're cheering, yelling, burn Osea to the ground. But here's the thing. Particularly in this one, Osea did absolutely nothing wrong. Osea did nothing wrong. I think the most questionable thing you do is when you go into Shalaji. But at the same time, whoever, I guess, did that intel analysis was right in the sense of it didn't seem like those guys were going to surrender or decide to work with the Oseans anyway. But particularly in this is the second major war in a row, because the last major war they were involved in, at least as far as we know lore-wise, was the Circum-Pacific War, which is the war from Ace Combat 5. And in Ace Combat 5, basically, the Belkans essentially do false flag attacks against both Osea and Yuktobania. And they try to start a war, essentially. Now, Osea does not retaliate immediately. But Yuktobania, they pretty much blame the Oseans and take the bait, and they launch full-scale war against Osea, which drags immediately Osea into the fight. And despite what some of the complainy, whining characters are saying, in that case, I feel like Osea was effectively acting in self-defense. And you spend most of the war defending yourself, and then you spend the rest of the war prosecuting, essentially, a counterattack. I mean, they sink your carriers. They do all kinds of really awful stuff. And it's not really... Osea is drugged into the full-scale war. Yuktobania does not want to negotiate. They don't want to discuss what happened. Clearly, Osea doesn't know what's going on, because in the very beginning of that war, the flight school that you're supposed to be attending gets ambushed, and they kill all the cadets except for basically Nagase and obviously and the trainer, who's Bartlett. And you and Chopper are the only ones who are not on flight that day. So they move you to Sand Island to continue to train you, and then they ambush you again. Only this time, it's probably the Yuktobanians, not the Belkans, doing it. And the reason I say that is because the Yuktobanians have an observation ship in the area to pick up their downed pilots. And they pick up Bartlett, and that's how Bartlett ends up with the Yuktobanians, and then him and his, I guess his ex-lover, they get back together and they try to put the pieces together to figure out what's actually causing the war. Because neither of them are buying that the other country is starting it. Because I'm sure Bartlett got into, Yuktobanian custody, and they were like, oh my god, this you Oseans, why did you attack us at this? This is your fault. Oh yeah, so-and-so. And then he's like, you ambushed my squad like 2 weeks ago. You killed a bunch of just trainees for absolutely no reason, unprovoked. And now you've just done that again. I got shot down. It looks like my trainees got away, but like, what the hell? And since I think the chick who's his lover, she, I think, is in the Air Force, she would have been aware of basically attacks like that. Now, Sand Island was a little more of in a strategic spot, so it kind of makes a little more sense that you get attacked when you're at Sand Island. But that when you're attacked at the flight school in the north, that doesn't. There's no strategic reason for that, and that just seemed like that was just basically just to cut off the next crop of pilots coming up. And I assume other things happened in other places as well, because Osea is really short on pilots in Ace Combat 5, which is why you end up basically working for the Navy, the Marines, and the Air Force. And it's a lot falls on Wardog Squadron, and ultimately, also Rosgary Squadron. And they do mention 8492nd, who are working for the Belkans. And it's not impossible that the 8492nd, basically pretending to be Osean, they were actually they helped start the war. They do suggest that basically the 8492nd are responsible for the initial strikes against Yuktobania that made Yuktobania think Osea was attacking them. And it's not clear who attacked the Oseans. I suspect it probably wasn't the 8492nd. It probably was a unit within the Yuktobanians that was also a false flag unit. It's at least we assume that. We assume that the retaliation of the Yuktobanians was not to just attack a flight school and murder a bunch of people, which is why Osea doesn't go into full-scale war and retaliate. Like Harling is dealing with this, and right off the bat, Harling doesn't. He actually keeps it secret. And they tell the reporter, like, they confiscate his camera, the main guy, I forget what the hell the reporter's name is, and they basically they cover up the fact that an enemy has attacked them, and they do this literally because they're not sure, they're not convinced it's them, and they want to give them the benefit of the doubt, and they're trying to investigate what's going on. Well. The Yuktobanians repay that by basically launching a full-scale war against Osea. And something similar happens here. Basically, Osea is attacked, and the peacekeeping forces on the continent are attacked, and the Belkans help the Eruseans, who, this time the Eruseans are directly involved. Last time you get a sense that the Yuktobanians are more of, there were bad actors, but they're more pawns than actually intending to actually start a war with the Oseans. But in this one, the Eruseans actually collaborate with the Belkans, at least the faction within the Eruseans, to not only attack the Oseans unprovoked, but to do a false flag attack against their own capital with fighters marked as Osean that are not Osean in order to rally the people. And Osea, they try to kind of, I guess with the dialogue, act like, oh, war's bad, and this whole war is destructive and pointless. But it's really not, because if Osea hadn't actually responded to the unprovoked attack by the Erusians, the Erusian radicals would have been basically running the show in the continent of Osea, or is it Usea or Osea? I guess it's Usea. They would have just invaded and just annexed more countries, because that's what the radicals wanted. And then on top of all that, the space elevator, which was international, but it was run and paid for by the Oseans, that was hijacked. They hijacked. They stole Osean weapons systems, their UAVs. They were spoofing their IFFs, which is a major. It's one thing to spoof an IFF to slip by and do sneaky stuff. It's another thing to bomb your own side while spoofing IFFs in order to start a war. That's got to be some sort of. That's like an extra special level of war crime. Some Erusians who are responsible, I suspect, are going to hang for doing that. And if they don't, it's pretty foolish. And then one of the craziest things that happens in this game is that after the Oseans, after having taken the capital, immediately when the Erusians who want to surrender, because they don't like the radicals who have started this war illegally, The Oseans immediately say, okay, we'll negotiate with you. We'll work with you. We're going to, something weird's going on. They're spoofing IFFs. This is all really crazy, and we want to talk. We want to end the war. And so the guy who's leading the charge on that does, in fact, get killed. And it looks like he was killed by friendly fire, because in the mission, it doesn't always do it, but sometimes there's an order out to kill that general and the Osean officer who's with him. And it comes from an Osean transmission, but it's obviously not. It's obviously being spoofed. But the other forces don't know that. And you know that because I think Trigger actually knows that the whole time, which is why he's in the penal unit in the first place. And I think that they're literally using the penal unit as bait. And they basically trick the Eruseans into thinking that the Oseans actually don't know that they've been jacking their satellites and spoofing their stuff. And I think the way they deal with that is, one, they have basically take the capital and then blow up the satellites to stop retaliation. And then the second piece of that is essentially lure them out so they're sure. And it works because the second to last mission in the 444th Trigger over the mountain range or wherever the hell it is. I don't really like that mission. But you encounter that flight of Osean fighters that aren't. They're actually UAVs that are being controlled by the Eruseans. And you deal with that, and I think Trigger has volunteered essentially to draw that out. And I think Bandog himself actually figures this out, and that's why one of the reasons Full Band gets taken out, because Full Band, not only does he know about the he figures out what's going on with the use. They're going to try to steal the Stonehenge to use the railguns to shoot down one of the Arsalan birds. But he also possibly was going to even worse, break in and blab his mouth about what the Oseans are trying to do to stop the spoofing. And ultimately, the Oseans, they can't hack it back. It seems that they probably are attempting to, and they ultimately can't stop it. And their only solution is to just blow up the satellites. Because that was... And if you'll notice, that's the only time the Eruseans are able to come out and then communicate on the ground with the Oseans and and basically not get spoofed and actually have a chance of ending the war. That war was not going to end, even though they took Farbanti, if those satellites had remained, because the Oseans were... You still hear of basically Oseans committing fratricide accidentally, and you hear the transmissions that are placing orders that are obviously not true. And then after you negotiate, the Oseans successfully negotiate with the Conservatives, and then there's a disaster, and the guy who's in charge dies, and it sucks. The rest of the Conservative faction, who should be basically really, really pissed off at the Erusean radicals, because here the Oseans are trying to stop the war. They're trying to stop the counterattack. They want to leave. They want to go home. And the radicals, just basically by killing this this Conservative general, ends up... They're extending the war even further. And a lot of that has to do with basically the Belkans want Osea to burn, so they're going to basically make sure the war lasts as long as possible. And we assume the radicals don't want to take, basically, if the jig's up and they lose the war, they're going to be tried for war crimes. So they have no reason to stop. But the Conservatives then take that grace that the Oseans have given them, and they just decide that they're going to start committing war crimes against basically Belkan civilians, who, granted, they are co-conspiring with the Erusean radicals, but you still don't show up and just kill everybody's family, like they suggest that's going on. And then they also go after the Oseans. They continue to prosecute the war against the Oseans. And the Oseans didn't do anything. The Oseans are the complete victims in all this, despite what Avril says. Osea doesn't do anything in this war to provoke the wrath of Usea Erusean or anybody on the Erusean continent, because even the Volstock or whatever it is, the place that's apparently the Air Force of Shalaji, they tell the Oseans, like, we're going to fight you off because there won't be peace in this land until you leave. And that's so not true, because it's up to the Oseans are the only chance that entire region has at peace, because they have two options basically. It's either go under the heavy conservative rule of the Erusians, who are basically just going to exterminate and wipe out and rule with an iron fist, clearly, because they don't care about killing civilians. Or you go under the boot of the radicals, who want to basically start a world war, kill the Oseans, fight with their neighbors, and then conquer a bunch of other countries around it, and further expand the Erusian Empire. So, Osea here, trying to be a peacekeeping force, obviously picking up more of the slack than even ISAF was, because ISAF, I guess they dispersed after the war in Ace Combat 4. Obviously, the Oseans are funding this, and they're trying to keep the peace. I mean, they build them a space elevator that's giving them energy from space, and I mean, just could you imagine the jobs and how much better that would? I mean, the other thing is Osea is a equatorial nation. They actually cross the equator. Now the way the physics works in Strangereal is a little weird. Like their Earth is larger than ours, but it's the same density. So Hollow Earth Strangereal confirmed. But not just that, but the way the seasons work, it seems like if it's on the equator, it's not tropical. You have to be further south for it to be that tropical. So I guess the spin is different position to the sun. I don't know. It's not super clear. They have the same dates we have. They have the same calendar, so I'm not really sure what they're going for. But my point is that if the Oseans are a country that's on the equator, there is absolutely no reason to build the space elevator anywhere else but in Osea, other than you're essentially gifting its benefits to the region that you're building it. Because the Oseans, I mean, after this huge war, after the Belkans have now they've started two conflicts with them. And they haven't wiped out the Belkans. They haven't crushed them. They took a piece of South Belka to separate it. And it was kind of controversial. And then instead of just annexing them or occupying them the way, like West Germany was occupied, or the way Japan was occupied after World War II, where basically the foreign country runs the show, they actually made the North Oseans, the basically Southern Belkans, Osean citizens. They were allowed to vote. Now, Osea is a federation, but they do seem to be set up very similar to the United States. I guess less the Washington Monument, which apparently is what the Erusians have. In Farbanti, there's a big Washington Monument. And I think in Anchorhead, there used to be the World Trade Center, and they've changed that to these other two looking buildings. Erusia is a weird place. But I just wanted to, I don't know, just talk for, I guess, a minute on some of the lore in this game. And I don't understand the Japanese trying to act like there's two sides to some of these conflicts. It's very strange, especially in this one. The Oseans haven't done anything wrong. Also, I love this boss fight. This is really good, and whoever's playing Scream does crazy really well. And yes, you can cheese it if you have the right weapons. You can absolutely pop one of them right in the beginning, and then it skips. One of them explodes, and you hear them yell. And then the guy, the general, I guess is it Shepard? No, Shepard's the one who's in charge of him. Whatever, the lieutenant colonel, whoever his name is, who's running the operation right now. He just, the second one of them dies, he goes, "You two siblings can go to hell," because that's I guess the end of the conversation, and it skips forward because it has to get to the dialogue. I don't know. It's kind of funny, but yeah. So I just wanted to talk about that a little bit. I do like this game. I don't understand Japan's need. I mean, war sucks. We know this. I mean, there's a lot of people who die in this, and there's a lot of good people who die, and a lot of people suffer, and it's not good. Just because you're in the air doesn't mean that there's not suffering on the ground. They're constantly talking about refugees and all this other stuff. But the Oseans don't catch a break. They They don't do anything wrong. At least in my opinion. Am I missing something here that the Oseans did to provoke essentially a false flag attack in their name on the Erusean capital, followed by basically hijacking of their equipment? And I mean, they assassinated Harling. And also, some orders go out to go shoot down the space elevator, which would have stranded the astronauts. And it's suggested that the Belkans at first order that, because maybe they think that they're actually going to lose control of the Arsenal birds. I don't know. It seems very silly that Avril as a character is very, very self-righteous and trying to act like, oh, war's hell, don't know why I'm here, blah, 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 the Osea sucks. It's like, no. And also, I don't think she's telling you the whole story if she got sent to a military prison to work as an engineer, which means basically there's some sort of drafting going on. There's some sort of conscription. Or maybe she was AWOL, because, why else would they have put her in a military unit? And, she didn't do anything wrong. She gets shot down when the elevator is being attacked because she flies into the airspace vicinity. And while I think that a F-15 pilot should have known that a F-105 was not an enemy threat, she didn't have an IFF, and, Osea was suddenly under attack from all places, and, mistakes happen. So it doesn't seem like she did anything wrong, but she's like, oh, I went and I got sent to prison for violating. So it's like, I don't think that's the whole story, Which is another reason why I think actually Trigger, I think they knew from the beginning that he was not actually the killer of Harling, because they would have never let him back in an airplane if he had assassinated a former president, especially someone who was a hero like Harling. They would not have let him back in the cockpit. He would have probably been in a maximum security prison. I mean, he might have even been executed for the sake of morale. But they knew he didn't do that. By doing what they did, they got him in the air. They got him to basically be a force multiplier in an otherwise ineffectual unit, and they got to basically deceive both the Belkans and the Erusians because they couldn't figure out. Remember, the Oseans couldn't figure. They kind of knew what was happening, but they didn't know how it was happening or why it was happening, and they had to basically do some sneaky stuff to make sure they didn't get caught. So that's my full-throated defense of Osea, and I do like this game. I like best wingman's probably Hushin, and a lot of that has to do with the fact that Michelle Ruff does the voice, and she does this rough, tough girl voice that's actually really cute. So maybe that's some of it, but yeah. So all my complaints about the game I had during yes, that was a video. That wasn't me live playing. During the last video, I still hold to them. I still think that there are features that went missing since 5 that should be back. I still think 0 has the best air-to-air combat, period. And a lot of that has to do with just the way the missiles behave, where it was high risk, high reward. In fact, I like the aircraft in 0 because they're a little older and it just feels a little more authentic. I'm not a big fan of the futuristic stuff. Once you start kind of getting Gen 5 and past Gen 5, it starts turning in more into like a Star Wars style dogfight than actually anything based in the principles of dogfighting. I know it's arcadey. I know it's not super realistic. I know, but it then becomes that much harder to, I guess, round the square or put the square peg in the round hole when you have stuff like an F4 Phantom, and then you have stuff like the Raven, which is this future laser shooting. It's I think they may be getting a little bit ahead. Although I think probably the next one's going to probably be. My guess is the next Ace Combat, or I should say within the next 2 Ace Combats, it's going to be a remake of Ace Combat 3. There were some billboards and stuff. I think they're setting up I don't know how Grunder Industries is going to be tied in. I suspect they're going to be probably disbanded after this, but maybe they reestablish themselves as either General Resources or whatever the other faction was in Ace Combat 3. It was also on this continent, and if they're going to reuse resources, reuse the maps and all that stuff, now's the time for them to do it. I don't know what it'll look like. I tend to think they're probably going to be. I mean, they probably just 1-to-1 just redo Ace Combat 3. The thing is 3 is a big game. 3 is as big as 5, and 5 was huge. And 3 had, I think it had 5 different endings. It had a UN security force ending. It wasn't UN, but it was whatever this group actually that the Oseans are a part of. It had one for General Resources. It had one for the other faction, and it had one for this terrorist group, who was a lot like what was it, Nations Without Borders or whatever, Pilots Without Borders, whatever the terrorist group was from Ace Combat 0. And then the last is you do it again, and then you find out that it's a simulation. And it's assumed that either the war starts or something else happens. And if they left it at a cliffhanger, who knows what? I mean, I suspect they would finish it, but the problem is that there's so much to the story and there's so much content. I mean, maybe they have the high quality videos of the original animation. Maybe they'll just redo the animation and make all the cutscenes 2D animated instead of the 3D. I wouldn't be opposed to that. I think that's kind of cool. There's not any animation in gameplay that needs to be like completely transitional. I guess other than takeoff sequences, but it worked. It worked in 3. It wasn't really a complaint in 3, and the cutscenes in this look closer to the gameplay, I guess, than in any other game where the cutscenes, the way they look relative to the gameplay, but it's still not really the same. So I don't see. I mean, I don't want them to go live action, but I think if it gets a better story, if it gets a better result overall, I'm not opposed to them going back to the Ace Combat 3 animated style cutscenes. Zero, I love Zero. I adore the cheesiness and the dorkiness and the dubbing, and I just with the lip sync and the ADR, and it's such a weird game. If you have not played Zero, play Zero. I guess you can watch Maxwar's video on it too after you played it, or even before, because the game's an absolute trip. It's definitely a favorite amongst Ace Combat fans, and I think if you were introduced with Zero, you probably have 100% opinion that is your favorite one of all time. For me, my favorite is 5 because I have a more of a connection to 5. I think 5 overall was a more rich game, but Zero's gameplay was, I mean, they improved on what 5's was. Things like enemy aircraft being damaged and retreating. I think there was ejecting in Zero. There wasn't any of that in there. Let's just say there hasn't been any of that since Zero, and it's really bizarre. Branching paths for both missions and victories. I don't remember if 6 had any branching paths. I think it had like branching mission objectives, but 5 had like different, like separate missions, which was really cool. And I think it had a bonus ending for when you beat on Ace. But Zero, actually, there was completely different endings depending on which style of Ace you were. And, or I should say, at least the lore, the way it explained the lore and the way it talked about your character, how they fit into the legend, essentially changed depending on how you flew, which gave it a lot of replay value. In this one, I mean, I guess you get a little extra dialogue if you do well in some cases, but there's not any incentive past the medals, and also, you know, generally enjoying the gameplay. I'm crapping on it a little bit, but I do genuinely enjoy this game. But other than that, it's we're waiting for us Ace Combat fans. We're waiting for our basically Ace Combat 5 remake with Zero's gameplay. There's and the and the hard points for the special weapons from Project Wingman. Like if they did that, they'd be printing money. I know that's much easier said than done. I am a little sad that Nagase's VA was replaced in this one. I don't know. They didn't have Karen. Karen Strausman was available. Like, why didn't they just call her? I don't know. It's there's a couple goofy mistakes with some of the English audio in this. I'm not super impressed with the dub work. I don't think all the directors knew what was going on, and it shows, especially in the delivery of certain lines where the inflection is incorrect to the context. I guess this is getting kind of long now, but I love the game, and Osea did nothing wrong.